And welcome to the October 2022 edition of City Connection. City Connection is the live television program from Community Media Center with Grand Rapids Mayor Rosalynn Bliss. It is here to offer the community a chance to hear about efforts from City Hall in Grand Rapids and far beyond. With the Community Media Center, I'm your host, Phil Tower, filling in today for Starla McDermott, Executive Director of Community Media Center, today on City Connection. I'm very pleased to be joined by the Director of the Office for Oversight and Accountability for Grand Rapids, Brandon Davis. Also with me, of course, Mayor Bliss will talk with Brandon about his role with the city and what's currently going on with that office and the important workings there. Also later on City Connection, we'll provide time with Mayor Bliss for you and your questions, as well as comments. That will be in the second half of our program. Now, how do you take part in this conversation? You can send questions or comments to cityconnection@grcmc.org, cityconnection@grcmc.org, or through Twitter @GRTV Access, or by commenting on the GRTV Facebook page. Either way, we'd love to hear from you. City Connection is a collaboration between the Community Media Center and the City of Grand Rapids, and we are broadcasting live today, October 3rd, 2022, here on Community Access Television Channel 24. We're also live streaming at therapidian.org and on Facebook at the GRTV Facebook page. We will also rebroadcast this program throughout the month of GRTV on GRTV Cable Channel 25. And now in studio with me is Grand Rapids Mayor Rosalynn Bliss. Mayor Bliss, welcome back to the studio. It's great to have you here.
It's good to be here with you.
And it's good to fill in, and it's a great opportunity to reconnect on everything going on here in the city of Grand Rapids. I know you've got to be a project manager at heart because you've got a lot of different things going on, number one. And for full disclosure for our viewers, the last time I hosted a public access TV show, there was no social media and no internet. I'll just let you figure out the math from that angle. First of all, front and center issues with the city. A lot of things that have happened. A new city budget passed earlier this year in late May. And one of the exciting things about this, which I think is innovative, I know it's been talked about for a long time, is this implementation of a city co-response team. Yeah. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it is really exciting, and I feel like I've talked about this since I've been mayor, seeing it happen in other cities, and we're just in there's a huge need, and we're in a position to move forward with that program. So the sheriff of Kent County, she's been talking about it for a couple of years, has been implementing some aspects of it at the county level. And then, as you said, the City Commission supported funds. We also got some grant funding to support the initiative. And it's really twofold. One, it's providing trauma-informed training to police officers. And then we have a contract with Network 180 for clinicians. And so when certain calls come in, dispatch will triage those and assess those. And then they send out some of our what we call CIT officers with clinicians. And once the scene is safe, if it's more appropriate for a mental health worker to take it from there, they will.
What does the CIT officer do? CIT is an acronym for?
Yeah, it's community. It's basically trauma-informed training.
Okay.
For officers. So it's I believe almost 40 hours worth of training, really specific to how teaches officers how to respond more appropriately to individuals who are having a mental health crisis or a substance use crisis. But we implemented a couple of years ago a homeless outreach team, and with the homeless outreach team, we also have a contract with Network 180, and that team is made up of police officers, firefighters, and clinicians.
This is important because we know so many challenges impacting not only Grand Rapids, but cities all across the country are based on mental health challenges. And it is certainly been exacerbated with COVID and a lot of other issues. There are plenty of challenges going on. This team obviously is going to be multidisciplinary, but if you can talk about how this might work in a real life situation, because someone calls 911, it's going to be dependent on a 911 dispatcher to
Yeah.
kind of route that call properly, correct?
Yeah, yeah. So there's training at the dispatch level, but let's say we get a call and there's a concern that about someone's well-being, or that an individual may have suicidal ideation, and so an officer would go with a clinician and make sure that the scene is safe, and then the clinician would be able to work with that individual to determine, what services do they have? Are they already connected with an organization that's supporting them? Do they need more acute psychiatric care? And then how do we get them that care and that support that they need? And so it's in partnership with a lot of, I would say, a number of community nonprofit organizations that are doing this work and providing resources. And then, hopefully that individual will get the help they need and not escalate to a point where potentially they're arrested or go to jail.
How common is this idea of a co-response team for cities like Grand Rapids, and really just in a general sense, similar-sized municipalities across the country?
So you've seen these teams start to become much more common, I'd say, over the last 6 to 8 years. And so, I first learned about it probably about 6 years ago. There's different models based on the city, but Memphis has one in Denver. And so early on, when I was mayor, I connected with those mayors and learned about the work that they were doing. And then you've seen them really start to just proliferate across the communities.
And in a general sense, police departments support and welcome this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And even our officers have said, a lot of the calls that we respond to are calls that don't necessarily need a police officer. They need somebody who is more skilled in crisis intervention.
Right. Let's move on to another critically important issue. Everyone is talking about it, not only at the rental level, the ownership level. It is affordable housing.
Yeah.
And the Affordable Housing Fund, this is something that is I know it's been a great concern of yours. Talk about where we are right now with respect to the Affordable Housing Fund.
Yeah, so the Affordable Housing Fund was a fund that the City Commission created about a year and a half ago. And we set up a board. We're working through and in partnership with the Grand Rapids Community Foundation. We took initially about $1 million, and then once we got ARPA funds, we put about $5 million worth of ARPA funds into that. So it's a little over $6 million fund right now. The intent, if we sell 201 Market to the Convention Arena Authority, we'll take $10 million of the sale of that property and put it in the fund. So my hope is that within the next 5 months, it'll be closer to a $17 million fund. The board has been meeting. Actually, they've been meeting for the last couple months. And their job is to identify recommendations that will come back to the City Commission on how those dollars can be used to expedite affordable housing in our community. And when the fund was created, the Commission, myself included, we have a lot of concern about families that really fall in that missing middle, as we call them. So we have a lot of resources from the state and the federal government to support individuals who fall under a category under the federal guidelines for low-income families. So like low-income housing tax credits and vouchers and Section 8. Then you have market rate housing, and then you have these individuals and families in between where they don't qualify for low-income housing, but they also can't afford market rate housing. And so our hope is that with this fund, which has largely unrestricted dollars, we'll be able to use those funds to support smaller scale infill housing that can start to meet the need of families kind of in that missing middle.
The application process, how will folks eventually apply for this?
Well, it will depend on the pots of money. So
Okay.
some of the ideas that we're talking about so far would be to provide funding for, to increase our down payment assistance program. So one of the priorities is we want families to be able to buy a home, have stability, but also to start generate wealth. So there'd be a separate process for that. We've talked about incenting accessory dwelling units to add additional housing units to the market pretty quickly. We've talked about how do we support infill, which would be smaller, maybe brownstones or townhomes that would be anywhere from 4 to 6 units. And so it will depend on what the recommendation is,
Okay.
how much money out of that pot of roughly $6.5 million is allocated for that use, and then we would come up with a process to disperse those funds.
And the exciting thing about this is that this certainly could be used as a model for other cities
Yeah.
who are certainly watching us at this level.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to use these funds to be extremely creative, but also that we'll be able to put them to use as quickly as possible. There are some other cities that have set up affordable housing funds, but they've used federal funds that are much more restrictive, and our hope is that these funds are less restrictive, which will enable us to be more creative.
It certainly sounds like a great plan.
Yeah.
Let's talk about something very important, which is, of course, Election Day coming up. Tuesday, November 8th, that's
Yeah.
barely a month away. There's an initiative happening right now in Grand Rapids, only for a few more days through October 5th. It's called PBGR,
Yeah.
Public Vote. I had to look this up myself to figure it out, but it's exciting. It's voter driven and it's interactive. Can you talk about PBGR?
Yeah, so this is actually another really exciting initiative. Has been something that I've wanted to explore for a number of years. With the ARPA funds, the federal funds that the city got, City Commission took $2 million and set them aside and said, you know what, we want the community to decide how these dollars are invested in their neighborhoods. So we put together a committee of residents to help us create this process, and they opened up the floodgates for ideas.
I'll bet they
They
did.
got hundreds of ideas, and then they vetted those ideas, made sure they were eligible for the funds, and that they were financially feasible, sustainable, that they would have a strong impact on community. And then they vetted those down. We released those kind of vetted ideas, final ideas, last week. There are ideas for the first ward, second ward, and third ward, and now we're in the voting process. So people can go online and vote. They can go to our Grand Rapids Public Libraries and vote. There's a couple community events actually tonight, tomorrow night, and Wednesday night of this week in each neighborhood where people can go and vote. And it's really easy. So I voted last week when the portal became open. So you go in and you put in your name.
Oh, wait a minute. You're allowed to vote?
I am allowed to vote because I'm a resident.
Good. You are a resident. That's fair.
So I went to second ward because I live in the second ward. I live over by Fulton Heights. And so I put in my name. It asks your address to confirm that you're a resident and that you live in your ward, your phone number. And then it lists all of the ideas and then you rank them. So what is your first choice, second choice, kind of like ranked choice voting.
Sure.
Once the voting is all done, we'll have the priorities that rose up between the three wards, and then those recommendations will come back to the City Commission for funding.
And the beautiful thing about this is those who complain after the process, you can say, did you participate?
Did you vote? And
Absolutely.
Did you
you vote? What's the best way people can take part in PBGR if they're City of Grand Rapids residents?
Yeah, so they can go to the website and you can vote right online. As I said, it's really easy to do. You can call City Hall, so call 311 if you're curious where you can physically go, but you can go to any of our Grand Rapids Public Libraries and vote. And if you have additional questions, you can always call my office or call 311. So my office number is 456-3168.
All right, terrific. Mayor Rosalynn Bliss with us on City Connection. I'm Phil Tower from Community Media Center, sitting in on this month's program for our Executive Director, Starla McDermott. When we come back, Mayor Bliss will get an update from the Director of the Office of Oversight and Public Accountability. That's Brandon Davis, and you're watching City Connection here on GRTV.
For over 30 years after humble beginnings as a public access TV station, the Community Media Center has grown to be an active, multi-platform media and technology assistance organization, encouraging and enabling our community to push the creative boundaries. We power a variety of resources, including a music-centered community radio station, WYCE, a community venue with stage and screen at Wealthy Theater, citizen-driven journalism with the Rapidian, a web development team empowering local nonprofits, an education department that trains and broadens students' minds, and a free speech public access television studio, GRTV, where it all began. By introducing audiences to new voices and ideas, we enhance community engagement and create connections between artists and audiences, enriching our city's cultural offerings. We empower and collaborate with platforms and resources accessible to all and used by all. Every free democratic society depends on media, accessible to the community and uncensored by government. The Community Media Center continues this work for the media landscape of today and tomorrow. These platforms and services empower our neighbors to tell their stories and explore the richness of culture that Grand Rapids has to offer. Connect, discover, learn, create, and share. The Grand Rapids Community Media Center.
I'm so glad today to be joined by Brandon Davis, our Director of Office of Public Oversight and Accountability, an office that was created just a couple years ago. So Brandon's relatively new in his position, although I feel like you've been with the city, well, you were with the city before moving into this position. So, yeah, so what I'd like to do today is, one, for folks who aren't familiar with your office and what you are charged to do, let's talk about that, but also let's talk a little bit about your history and what kind of led you to this position and being interested in leading this office. Sure. You have a rich history in this work, and so why don't we start with talking about you, how you got here, and then let's talk about the office.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me, Mayor. I'm excited about being here and excited about the opportunity. My background is really based in criminal justice. So, I grew up on the west side of Detroit. In a neighborhood that the way I usually describe it is so tough. My mom didn't allow me to ride my bike one house to the right or one house to the left. But it really, and that's not an exaggeration, but the conditions I grew up in caused me to really have an appreciation for the pursuit of justice. And that was embedded in me from a young age. So I went to college at Central Michigan University and then went to law school at Wayne State University. And quite honestly, did not know what type of law I was going to practice. I just knew that I wanted to practice law in order to help people. So I took an internship in the prosecutor's office in Detroit to get trial experience, because for lawyers, that's a big deal. And I got there and realized this is a place I can make an impact, because there were a lot of people making decisions about people who looked like me, but there wasn't a lot of people who looked like me making those decisions. And this was such an awesome opportunity to change lives. So I started working there and did some work as a felony trial lawyer in Detroit. Ended up getting the opportunity to transition my family to the west side of the state, and I became a senior assistant prosecutor in the Muskegon County Prosecutor's Office. And even before I did some of that work, I was in defense. So my background was criminal justice, and I was working to make the court system more equitable. I was working to make sure that we had decisions that made sense. And I did that for a while, really about 7 years. I got an opportunity to come to Grand Rapids, and I was not expecting it at all. But I was super excited to come over, and I came and began to work in our labor relations department. And for me, that was an opportunity to learn another area of the law. So that was in the early part of 2018 when I came and did that, and we were jumping into bargaining at that time, and it was trial by fire. I was learning a lot very quickly. And then City Manager Mark Washington came to the city just a little bit after I did, and when he got here, he knew about recommendations that had been made to create an oversight office, and he had a passion for civilian oversight and experience with civilian oversight. And he said, I want you to do some research on this. And quite honestly, I was just doing the research on it. I began to learn quite a bit about civilian oversight, and what I learned was it was really this space that was almost like a marriage between criminal law and labor law, which now was my expertise. And after some time and a public process where I interviewed for the position, I was offered the opportunity to lead this work, and so grateful to do it.
Yeah, I'm very grateful that you are in this position and that
you.
you are with the city. And so you, a little over 2 years ago, right? About 2.5?
Yeah, about
it
two
was,
and a half.
February, March of 2020.
Yes.
Right around COVID.
Yes.
I feel like everything in my life is pre-COVID, post-COVID.
That's how it works.
But you were right in the middle. So you started the position, and you initially didn't have a lot of support.
No.
And by support, I mean your staff wasn't very big, and you were creating the department, creating priorities, creating a strategic plan. I know you've received some grant funding since then, and then the City Commission has allocated additional funds to the office. So tell us where the office is today and what your primary priorities are.
So super excited about where we are now, and I'm grateful for the investment that's been made in our office, which allows us to really do this important work. So the major focus of the Office of Oversight and Public Accountability, as you know, is to increase accountability and transparency in our public safety systems. So our long-term vision is to build bridges to trust between public safety and community, to build bridges to respectful relationships. But we recognize you can't build a bridge on a rocky foundation. So in order for us to build, we have to root up the foundation of those things that have been traumatizing, those things that haven't been great in the history of our country, not just in Grand Rapids, in order for us to have a space to build that bridge. And we do that by looking at our policies, by looking at our procedures, by looking at our systems of accountability and working to increase that. So we work in 4 main categories. That's change, accountability, restorative justice, engagement, and education. So we talk about change, we're looking at policy. Accountability, we're looking at the actions of officers or the department. Restorative justice, which is the part that's near and dear to my heart. We really look at systemic harm that's been caused by the criminal justice system and say, how can we fix this? How can we work to work through it? And then we have that engagement section, that education and empowerment section, and that's where we say, who's teaching community about these laws that they're expected to abide by? An example I often use is resisting and obstructing a police officer. It's something we hear about often on the news, but it's not something the average person understands how it works under Michigan law. Who's teaching that, right? We need those types of conversations. So our work spreads across all of that. And when the office first started, it was just me. So
I remember that.
So and I was excited to do it. I was grateful for the opportunity, but there was a lot to accomplish. We did some work with community to hear what community really wanted to see from an oversight office. And so we built a strategic plan around that. And over time, we've been able to staff up. So we were able to first get one position and borrow a position from another department. But this last budget cycle, super grateful for the support of the City Commission, the City Manager, and community partners to get to a place where we've been able to build our staff up. There's now 7 of us in the office, which is amazing. And we're working in those different categories.
Okay, so some of the programs that you're leading, one that you took on, and I appreciate, is Cure Violence. So you're helping to lead the Cure Violence program in partnership with the Urban League.
Yes.
But you're also hosting a whole host of other programs and initiatives out in the community. So you want to talk about those?
Sure. So we are super excited to partner with the Urban League on Cure Violence. They've been an amazing partner. It's an opportunity for us really to look at the root causes of violence instead of just talking about the violence that occurs, which is important, right? It's stuff we need to deal with, but the root causes so that we can work through those things. And that's something that oversight offices have not done traditionally, and we're grateful that Grand Rapids has such a collaborative mindset that we're able to do things that don't always fall within what you would always see from these type of offices. But other programs we work on, one that I'm really passionate about is our Clean Slate program.
Yes.
And within the last, I want to say 2 years, there was a major change in the law as it relates to expungements. It used to be that in Michigan, you could only get 1 felony expunged in your lifetime. And it had to fit certain categories. It had to be over 5 years that it passed. But the governor and the legislator decided that it was time to make some changes as it relates to that, and that we wanted to give people in our communities the opportunity to have a clean slate when they've served their time and they're now trying to move forward in life and be productive members of society. And one of the things that we do is we help them do that. So just recently we hosted an expungement fair where we helped over 500 people look and see whether or not they were eligible to obtain expungements. And over just under 300 of those people were able to fill out applications and get those filed with the courts. And I'm excited to be a part of a city where we say, not only do we want to work to help people get the information, but we want to put resources behind it to help them get it done. And that's what we did. We paid for fingerprinting along with community partners who helped us through that. And we had volunteer attorneys come in who worked through that application process. It was an amazing event.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It was. And you're also taking on, well, you've done an analysis of all of the city committees around public safety.
Yes.
You also are helping with, as you said, know your rights.
Yes.
So that people are well informed of what their rights are if they do get pulled over. So as you look at now being fully staffed,
Yes.
What are some things that you're hoping to accomplish in the next 4 to 6 months?
Sure, so there are a couple of things that we're working on, probably more than a couple, but a few that I'll talk about. One is a Civil Rights Youth Academy that we're working through. So one of the things that we've been talking about for a little while now is that we need to engage our youth at an early stage. And I know, Mayor, you do work with the Mayor's Youth Council, but we've been looking at ways to get people involved in civil rights, right? They need to understand that there is, first of all, a space for them in public safety. There's a space to make a difference. There's a space to make an impact. And when we talk about public safety work and we talk about civil rights, those are things that people are concerned about across the nation. That's not just a Grand Rapids thing. But we want to make sure that the youth in our community can be connected. So our team is working to build out programming that is a cohort style model where there will be these monthly discussions that youth are engaged in for a period of about 5 months. And during that time, they'll learn about their different rights. They'll learn how to apply their different rights, and they'll learn how to advocate for others in those spaces. So we're really, really excited about that. We're also really excited about our Let's Talk About It program. And that's a program where we say, instead of hiding from issues that people are concerned about, let's talk about it, right? We'll never be able to reach consensus if we can't get to a place where we can have meaningful conversation. So we invite individuals from community, some experts, some community members, just to talk about the real issues that concern them. We provide information regarding the law and policy, and then work together to see if we can find a collaborative solution. So we're building out new programs around that as well, which is super exciting. It's an amazing time in OPA.
Yeah, that is so exciting. So we are just getting ready to close this section. So for folks who want to get involved in any of these programs, should they just go to the city website?
That's the best way to do it. You can search for OPA on the city's website.
Okay.
You can email us at opa@grcity.us or call 616-4564-OPA.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we'll take a short break, and then we'll be back together with some additional questions.
The Wealthy Theater is Grand Rapids' local movie theater and performance center. Since 1998, it has been a host to nationally touring music groups, local theater performances, and a variety of community events. Today, the Wealthy Theater is not only a landmark community treasure with historic significance, but a pioneer in the infusion of technology and traditional theater. Underneath the elegance and classic sensibility that defines Wealthy Theater, there is a matrix of new technologies. The theater is completely digital and outfitted with cameras and microphones for concerts, theater and comedy troupes, speakers and lecturers, and so much more. Experience all that Wealthy Theater has to offer. And bring a friend. Be surprised by the Wealthy Theater.
WYCE is a world of music. We aim to shine a light on underserved musical artists in a non-commercial format with no advertisements. Volunteers come in to create personalized music programming that broadcasts over the air at 88.1 FM to West Michigan and via the internet to listeners all over the world. These listeners sponsor our efforts, keeping WYCE independent and community-owned. Musicians use the station to broaden their audience and build support for their latest projects by submitting their music to be included in our broadcast and performing live in studio. Businesses find their customers through underwriting, nonprofits inform the community to their mission, and listeners stay informed about local events. We believe that music is a powerful force that creates quality relationships in our community, that speaks to our emotions, and provides the soundtrack to our lives.
Welcome back to City Connection. I'm Phil Tower from Community Media Center. And on this segment of City Connection, it's our interactive round, or we could call it our lightning round, where we will ask questions of Brandon Davis and Mayor Rosalynn Bliss. Brandon, of course, with the Grand Rapids Office of Oversight and Public Accountability. You just heard Mayor Bliss speak with Brandon about the office and some of the goings-ons. We have some questions. One of those, Brandon, and I'm really glad we can take these interactive questions from our viewers. One of the questions was on the benefit of expunging a record from a criminal, and how does that benefit society overall? Obviously, it's controversial from some perspectives. Can you talk about that, please?
I'm happy to talk about it. So one of the great things about providing expungements to, and I wouldn't call them a criminal, I would call them someone who committed an offense and was now moving on with their life, is it provides the opportunity for them to do just that, right? So when the criminal
justice... And I'm going to stop you right there. I'm glad you said that, because I should have caught myself. When we label people, we put them in a box unfairly. And good people do commit crimes sometimes.
And I appreciate that, and I think they appreciate that. And the truth is that, as a society, that's how we've looked at it, right? There's the good guys and there's the bad guys, but that's not really the truth. That's not really the way it is. But the benefit is that we want people to be reformed. The purpose of our criminal justice system, there's a punishment aspect there, right? But there's a rehabilitative part that's so important. And if we want to make sure there aren't more offenses, we need to make sure that people have the opportunity to do well. Part of that is being employable, right? When there's a felony on someone's record, oftentimes they can't obtain employment. Sometimes it's difficult obtaining housing, and all of those things impact our community. We want to make sure that our community members are able to thrive and able to support themselves. So working through those types of processes provide them those resources. It also helps their children, because we know that people who are children of individuals who find themselves in those positions oftentimes can find themselves in a cycle. It breaks the cycle and allows all of us to move forward as a community as productive individuals.
And that chance to get a clean start can really make a huge difference.
It changes lives.
Yeah.
It changes lives. If I could share, at our last expungement fair, there was an individual that I was sitting across from, and I was working through the paperwork with them. And as they were doing the paperwork, tears were flowing from this woman's eyes. And she said, I never thought this day would come. I never thought I would be able to live this type of life. I feel free. I feel like I'll be able to be a great mother to my children. And as I watched her, we hadn't even filled out the full forms yet. Just the idea that somebody wanted to have that type of conversation shifted her entire paradigm.
Let's talk a little bit about one of the key tenets when you spoke to Mayor Bliss for your office, and it was a word that really stood out, because you have to engage with the public in this office to be successful. But can you personalize that? Can you humanize that, and what that engagement looks like for you on a daily basis?
Sure. I think that engagement is different every day. So,
which is great, makes your job better.
The engagement is definitely different every day. And the truth is that people want to engage with our office in different ways. You know, there are some people that rightfully so have criticisms on the way policing has been done historically, and they want somebody to know about that. So sometimes that's what the conversations are about. They want me to listen to their concerns and to think of ways to make changes. Other times we're in community and we're having conversations about the law. We're having conversations about policies that we've already worked to change as a government, and those things are great too. I enjoy the days when I'm able to get out and have conversations with young people. You know, that brightens up any day when they get to ask questions and I can see that curiosity burning in their mind. But there's different spaces, and one of the things the city's really trying to do is be intentional about our engagement. You know, for a long time in government, and one of the real criticisms of government was that we engaged, but we were just taking information, and there wasn't always this space where it looked like we were applying it. But the city of Grand Rapids is intentional about applying what we learn, and I love being a part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you're great for this job. This job takes a special kind of person because engagement, it takes two people. So I'm so glad to hear you say that. And please jump in. Don't let me monopolize this segment.
Go ahead. Those are great questions.
We're fortunate to have you, and I'm saying that as a non-city employee, by the way.
Thank you.
Another question for Brandon Davis with the Office of Oversight and Public Accountability here in Grand Rapids. How can the police, Brandon, establish trust in communities that have a trust issue with them, and rightfully so? The mistrust leads to negative interactions that lead to further mistrust. It seems like a cycle that is hard to be stopped. That's from Chad.
Sure. I think it is a cycle. That's a good way of describing it. But the first thing we have to do is acknowledge that there's a real breakdown in trust and that there are reasons for the breakdown in trust. Oftentimes people want to be acknowledged. There's real trauma that is embedded in the history of policing in America. That's something we can't run from. We have to acknowledge that it's real. We have to acknowledge how policing began, and then we have to work through the strategic or the systemic framework that exists around that. That's the first part. The other part is understanding that it is the responsibility of us as city employees, as government employees, to do that work. And it's easier for us sometimes to say, hey, community, what are you doing? And I think community has a big part in this, but it's not community's responsibility to undo the trauma that they experienced, right? So that's the first part of it, but it's being a part of the community. It's having those conversations. It's allowing community members to understand the humanity of officers, because officers are people too. You know, they bring emotions to work, and they have families, and they have concerns. And just seeing that community, that compassion, and seeing that humanity makes a difference in the life of the community.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. It's very true to recognize that. Another question for Brandon Davis with the city's Office of Oversight and Public Accountability. The question, Brandon, from Ben: what does the Civilian Oversight Board do, and who sets their priorities?
Okay, great. So we have a Civilian Appeals Board here in the city of Grand Rapids, and that is a body that is charged with reviewing certain types of closed cases of our internal affairs system. The easiest way to describe that is if someone makes a complaint regarding a police officer in the city of Grand Rapids, that complaint is investigated by the police department's internal affairs department. And once they make a decision on that, if they decide that the alleged offense did not occur, or that it was within policy and it falls within certain categories, it can be appealed to the Civilian Appeals Board. And the Civilian Appeals Board is a body of residents appointed by the mayor and city commission who are charged with reviewing those closed cases and determining if the facts line up with the policy, the way that the police department decided. And if they see it and say, no, this does not align with it, they can actually overturn the decision of our internal affairs division. And that is a major thing.
Yes,
we don't see that in a lot of other cities. That speaks to the heart of the city of Grand Rapids, where we say the voice of community really matters. In our strategic plan, we say we want to elevate resident voice in city operations. This is an example of that even predates that plan.
Mayor, that's going to be a lot of trust with that group of citizens.
Yeah.
A lot of trust, a lot of accountability, but a great opportunity as well. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, you know, it really is an incredible group of individuals who have a heart for service, but also a heart for justice. So Brandon is the liaison, but they also get training through our city attorney's office because they're acting as an appellate body. A lot of work goes into preparing them and informing them about the cases that they review. And then, as I said, Brandon is able to be present and also support them as they make those decisions.
I think one of the great parts is they're also trained by the police department. So our training unit actually takes them in and gives them parts of that use of force training and some of that tactical training so they can understand what it's like and those operational aspects that police officers use in their day-to-day jobs, and that helps inform the decisions they make.
Real quickly, in our remaining moments, your face lit up when you said you're really excited about the Let's Talk About It program within your office. Just again, touch on that if you would, please.
Sure, so Let's Talk About It is a chance for us to do just that. Talk about it, right? There are real issues that we're facing as communities, and we're not always going to see everything the same way. But we won't reach a solution if we just stay in our separate sectors and never get to having that conversation. So we bring community members together to talk about real issues. And sometimes that could be about a policy, that could be about a concern, that could be about a challenge. But if people want to learn more about that, they can go to the OPA's website on the city's page, and we can get there and talk more about it.
So all they have to do is reach out to you, and they could be a part of those conversations.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Very empowering, very exciting. Brandon Davis with the City's Office of Oversight and Public Accountability. Thank you so much for being with us on our rapid fire round, if we will. Coming up, we will talk with Mayor Bliss about questions that you have. Actually, we'll give you a chance to interact with the mayor. And again, thank you to guest Brandon Davis in this segment. Really appreciated you being with us, not only in this segment, but on the program today. We'll have more coming up in City Connection in just a moment.
How do you build a strong local food economy? Meet Chris. Chris is opening Osteria Rosa, a locally sourced Italian restaurant in a building brought back to life by 616 Development. But he doesn't know any local farmers to supply him with food year-round. This is Melissa. Melissa runs the Fulton Street Farmers Market and publishes a long list, even in the dead of winter, of available produce, meats, bakery goods, and more on the Rapidian. This is Amy. Amy wants to do more to support the farmers in her local food economy. Amy talks to Melissa, who introduces her to farmers at the Fulton Street Farmers Market, and Amy, in turn, publishes their stories, also on the Rapidian. Chris hears about the Rapidian and now has access to a local grocery list and information that he needs to make connections with local farmers. He feeds his patrons with local food year-round. Connections multiply. Meals are shared. A stronger local food economy is built.
And welcome back to City Connection, sitting in for the Executive Director of Community Media Center. Today I am Phil Tower along with Mayor Rosalynn Bliss. It is the October 2022 edition of City Connection here on GRTV. And Mayor Bliss, we've got some questions for you. I know you're ready for those. We are also going to be talking about the election, which is rapidly approaching. Tuesday, November 8th. I got Election Day right, I think.
Yep, November 8th.
It is just around the corner.
Yeah.
One of the questions related to that, there have been a lot of concerns about voting security, and we should state for the record there is absolute integrity with the voting system here in the city of Grand Rapids. I know your department, your city clerk's department, takes this, and all the clerks take this very, very responsibility. But I think concerns on both sides of the political spectrum about someone trying to tamper with equipment. Can you talk about that in terms of preventing anyone trying to spoil the election, if you will?
Yeah, well, first, I'll just be very clear that there is no evidence of fraud in past elections here in the city. So I want to be clear. I know there's lots of chatter out there about that.
And thank you for setting the record
I can assure you, and it's not just our city clerk, but county clerks all over the state of Michigan came out with a report well over a year ago after they had done analysis and said there is not evidence of fraud. So here at the city, we do, of course, we want to do everything we can to prevent impropriety or fraud from happening. And there are a number of safeguards put in place for the voting process. So even for our drop boxes, usually I get asked about drop boxes. Our drop boxes have security. They have cameras that are on them. They get picked up every single day. We have an individual going and picking those up. When you vote absentee, every single ballot is checked against the poll book. And then on election day, there's poll watchers that are there. We have really significant detailed training for all of our election workers. And then at the end of the night, when the votes are tallied, if there's anything that's off, those ballots are re-tallied and they're run through the tabulator again until everything matches, and then they're taken over to the county clerk for submission. One thing that's different this election compared to the election from 2 years ago, now city clerks, township clerks throughout the county, they have to physically take the information and the tabulated votes to the county clerk. So I know in this last election, the primary election in August, a lot of the results didn't come in until late in the night. Sometimes people jump to conclusions about that, but the reality is there's a lot of checks and balances and in place before the ballots are counted and taken over to the county clerk, and that just takes time. As of in August, any city clerk, ours included, you couldn't start even running the absentee ballots through the tabulator until that morning. So we had tens of thousands of absentee ballots that had to be opened and tabulated that morning. So very often what happens is we get the votes from the polls come back more quickly.
Yes.
Those go to the county clerk, but we're still running the absentees at our absentee voting location. And then when those are done, they go to the county clerk. So typically there's 2 batches. You have the batch of votes from the precinct and then the absentee ballots that are batched separately.
Mm-hmm. And I know the lawmakers in Lansing, the legislature has been trying to address that from a statewide perspective of at least allowing the clerks and their staff to open those mailed-in ballots, not to open the ballots, but just to open them, which would save an enormous amount of time and allow them on the day of the election then to tabulate the ballot, which certainly could change things and makes things easier. But it's important that people understand that there are great freedoms we have in this state. We now have any reason absentee ballot voting, and you can vote in person. In fact, you can change your mind if you received an any reason absentee ballot. Bring that to the poll on election day, and they will take that from you and allow you to vote in person. So a lot of opportunities. And before we get to Megan's question, I wanted to talk about that ballot because I know you feel it's important to let people know there are a lot of really important issues on the ballot for City of Grand Rapids voters. Let's highlight some of those.
Yeah, so a couple things about the ballot, and I'm glad you said we still have no reason absentee. So if for any reason at all you wanna vote absentee, all you have to do is call the city, or you can go online and request an absentee ballot. And as you said, you can bring it to the poll that day, you can put it in the mail, or you can drop it off to the city clerk's office Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. You can put it in one of our drop boxes. So we do have drop boxes throughout the city. We have them at every single one of our libraries, and you can drop them there as well. And then you can track online when we've received the absentee ballot. So it actually is tracked, and you can see that the clerk has it, and it's ready to go for Election Day.
Yeah, that's a great point.
But the ballot, this November ballot, is a very long ballot. It's 2-sided. So we have races all the way from, congressional race to top of the ticket statewide races from the governor, secretary of state, attorney general. We have state senators, we have state representatives. There are board of trustee candidates for all of our universities, so Michigan State, Wayne State, U of M. We also have judicial races, so we have both at the Michigan Supreme Court and then at our circuit court and district court. There are individuals running for those positions. Locally, we have our Grand Rapids Public School Board race. So there are 11 candidates for five open seats. We have Grand Rapids Public Library positions in the city of Grand Rapids. Every city commission ward, so we have 3 wards in the city for second and third. There are competitive races in all 3 wards, so people will be voting for city commission. And then there are 3 statewide ballot questions. One of them is on changing statewide term limits and mandating financial disclosure for elected officials at the state level. One is on ensuring accessibility of voting. So there's a number of changes that would include, and one of them being that you'd be able to vote 9 days in advance of an election day. And then the third one is about choice. So with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, there was a ballot measure to get that question on the ballot, and that is the third statewide ballot proposal. All of them important. When you get your ballot, there's a kind of a title for each of those 3 ballot questions, and then there's an explanation with bullet points so that you can fully understand what that question is asking you.
And most importantly, inform yourself before you open the ballot and start voting. If you have an absentee ballot, if you're going to vote in person, you can certainly do the same. Important to note, Mayor, if anybody moved into the city of Grand Rapids from an outside community, township, wherever they have moved, they need to register to vote. And that's very important. And the deadline, October 24th. That's 3 weeks from today, which is our broadcast date. We are live today on October 3rd, 2022. It's important because I think in the busyness of a move, we naturally forget, oh my gosh, I haven't registered in my new precinct.
Yeah, thank you for that reminder.
It is important.
It is important.
And I think most importantly, if you have a question about ballots, the state and the city have so many different resources, valuable resources, and you can trust that you're going to get accurate information there, whether it's through the City of Grand Rapids or the Michigan.gov voter information site. And by the way, they're both great resources there. Megan has a question, Mayor. Her question was, what projects were rejected for ARPA funding?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the ARPA, the participatory budgeting, that's such a mouthful every time I say it. Participatory Budgeting Committee reviewed all of the initial requests, and they're the ones that vetted them down. So I know I don't know all of the reasons that they used, but some of them were just very logistic. So it was the recommendation for something inside the city or in that ward, because you had to be very specific about ward projects that you were submitting. Was the individual with an organization eligible to submit the application? So if you look through a lot of the requests, they are in partnership with some type of nonprofit or some organization that can act as the fiduciary of those funds. So there's some of the projects include literacy for young children. There's a couple around violence prevention programs. There's a couple around mental health awareness, but it's in partnership with an organization that can act as a fiduciary. And then the big thing is, because these are ARPA funds, they have to be expended by 2024. So it had to be a project that could get off the ground and those funds could be expended by the end of 2024. That is just a hard stop with these funds. And so I know that those initial criteria were important ones that had to be vetted out.
All right, terrific. One other question, and of course your question's welcome here on City Connection. To remind city residents, Commission Night Out meeting dates.
Yes.
Our next meeting date is October 18th. There's also one on November 1st. Can you talk about the Commission Night Out?
Yeah,
events?
thank you for bringing those up. Last month we did one here in the First Ward, and really similar to what Brandon said, we're trying to create spaces where we can have conversations, and conversations where people who think differently and have different opinions can come together and talk about things. Instead of just the City Commission sitting there listening to public comment. Now that's an important part of our City Commission meeting, but it doesn't really create a space for dialogue. So our Commission Night Out, we're doing them differently than we've done in the past. They start at 5:30, so we have one coming up in the Second Ward at GRPS University on Fuller, and then one at Martin Luther King, I believe, is the other one.
November 1st.
On November 1st. And so we'll start the meeting at 5:30. We'll do a very brief presentation about some of the things the city is working on, about a 15-minute presentation. And then we have tables set up with 8 to 10 people at each table with an elected official and or city staff. And then we're going through specific questions in 4 categories: public safety, housing, infrastructure, mobility, economic development. We also have food that we provide starting at 5. So we do that for an hour and a half. And then at 7, we come back to the table, the full City Commission does, and we work through our city business agenda, and we cast votes on any resolutions or ordinances we have, and then have any scheduled public hearings, and then we finish up after that.
All right, so not the typical man or woman at the podium. This is
Yeah.
really interactive, sitting around tables.
Yeah.
I love that format. That's a great idea. And again, you can learn more about that on the City of Grand Rapids website, October 18th at GRPS University on Fuller, and then November 1st at Martin Luther King.
Let me look to make sure. It's on Madison. That's the 3rd Ward one. I wrote it down just so I wouldn't get it wrong. Gerald Ford.
Gerald Ford.
Gerald
Okay.
Ford.
Again,
851 Madison.
851 Madison, 2 wonderful opportunities to get up close and personal with Mayor Bliss and the Grand Rapids City Commission. That will put the wraps on this edition, this monthly edition of City Connection. Want to thank you for tuning in and for being a part of this program. For Starla McDermott, the host and executive director of the Community Media Center, I'm Phil Tower. Have a great night.